I woke at 5 that morning the way I always do now, before the sun, before the birds, before the house remembers it's supposed to be quiet. I made coffee I wouldn't drink and sat down across from the chair where Margaret used to sit, the one with the faded blue cushion she never let me replace. 11 months since the cancer took her, and I still set out 2 mugs some mornings before I catch myself. I want to tell you something before I go any further. My name is Walter Reyes. I'm 66 years old, and for 31 years I built and ran the largest commercial trucking company in the Texas Panhandle, out of a 2-truck operation. Margaret and I started in a rented lot behind a feed store, Reyes Freight Lines. You've probably seen our trucks on I-40 without knowing it. That's not bragging, son, daughter, whoever's listening this morning, that's just so you understand what I'm about to tell you. My phone buzzed on the kitchen table at 6:14 a.m. My daughter, Bethany, 29 years old. I married 3 years to a man named Corbin who sells something called wealth optimization consulting, which as far as I can tell means he sells other people's money back to them with his name attached. The message was short. Dad, change of plans for the Amarillo reunion. Corbin's parents are hosting instead, and it's going to be a smaller thing, just his side and immediate family. We think it's better this way. Hope you understand. I read it 3 times, standing in my kitchen with my late wife's coffee going cold in front of an empty chair, and here is what I understood. My own daughter had just uninvited me from a family reunion I had paid to organize, the one honoring what would have been Margaret's and my 42nd anniversary, the one I'd booked the entire Wild Horse Ranch Lodge for, 42 rooms, 6 months ago, $48,000. So that Margaret's brothers and sisters and every cousin scattered across 3 states could come home one more time to the town where she was born. I set the phone down, my hand did not shake. 31 years of negotiating fuel contracts and union disputes and insurance claims that could have bankrupted lesser men teaches you how to hold still when something inside you wants to break a window. I called her. It rang twice and went to voicemail. I called again. This time, someone else answered. Walter, hi. Corbin's voice always sounds like he's reading off a script written by someone who's never actually met another human being. Bethany's a little overwhelmed right now, so I said I'd handle this. Put my daughter on the phone. I really think it's better if we talk man to man about this. A pause, the kind he probably practiced in a mirror. Look, my parents feel like family gatherings should be, actual family. No offense. It's just you're not really blood to Bethany's side of things anymore, not since Margaret passed. It's a fresh start kind of thing. My mom's idea. Honestly, she's very intentional about energy. I stood there in my kitchen, in the house I built with my hands the same year Bethany was born, and I listened to a 34-year-old man who had never once helped me load a truck explain to me that I was not blood to my own daughter. I paid $48,000 for that lodge, I said. And we're so grateful, truly. I could hear him smiling. I have negotiated with enough men across enough tables to know exactly what a smile sounds like through a phone line, and I know exactly what it means when a man is being grateful for something he has no intention of giving back. Think of it as a gift. You gave everyone this beautiful weekend. You don't have to be there to have given it. That's kind of the purest form of generosity, don't you think? Letting go? Have you ever had somebody hand you your own kindness back to you like a receipt for something they've already returned? That's what that felt like. We'll send pictures, he said. You'll feel like you were there. And then, before I could answer, the line went dead. He'd hung up on me, in my own kitchen. 42 years to the week since I put a ring on Margaret Alvarez's finger in the parking lot of the Amarillo Dairy Queen because I couldn't wait one more day to ask her. I want you to understand something about grief. Whoever you are listening to this on your commute or in your kitchen this morning, maybe with your own coffee going cold, grief doesn't make you weak. It makes you very, very quiet. And quiet men notice things loud men miss. Because standing there with that dial tone humming in my ear, I wasn't thinking about revenge. Not yet. I was thinking about 6 months ago, when Corbin had sat at my kitchen table, this same table, and asked me, very casually, whether I'd ever considered modernizing the estate structure of Reyes Freight Lines, whether an LLC restructuring might make things cleaner for Bethany down the road, whether I'd thought about adding names to the deed on this house, just as a precaution, in case anything ever happened to me suddenly. I'd told him I'd think about it. I am a careful man. I did not tell him that 31 years in the freight business teaches you to read a bill of lading for what's missing as much as what's there, and that cleaner for Bethany is not the same sentence as cleaner for you both. and he had never once said Bethany's name without saying his own directly after it, like the two of them were a single word now instead of a marriage. I walked into the room that used to be Margaret's sewing room and is now my study, past the window where she used to sit with her machine humming while I did paperwork across from her, and I sat down at my desk. My laptop was already open. I hadn't touched the trucking business's day-to-day operations in 3 years, not since I'd handed the reins to my longtime operations manager, Denise Whitfield, and stepped back into what I'd told everyone was retirement. But I still owned every share. I still controlled every account. I still, as it turned out, had a great deal to lose, and I intended to find out exactly how close they had come to taking it. It took me 4 hours at that desk, and a phone call to my attorney, Sam Okafor, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who'd handled every contract Reyes Freight Lines had signed since 2009, to understand the shape of what was happening. Corbin had, in fact, drafted a document. Not signed, not filed, nothing illegal about drafting a document, but sitting right there in a shared cloud folder Bethany had apparently set up months ago for family financial planning, was a proposed power of attorney arrangement, prepared by a lawyer I'd never heard of, that would have given Bethany, and by marriage, Corbin full decision-making authority over my assets in the event I was deemed, in the document's careful clinical language, of diminished capacity. I am 66 years old. I passed a physical in April that a man half my age would envy. I have never in my life shown a single sign of diminished capacity, except perhaps the capacity to trust the people I raised. There was a second document in that folder. A rough draft of a letter never sent, thank God, or thank whatever careless cloud-syncing habit left it there for me to find from Corbin's mother, addressed to an assisted living facility in Lubbock, inquiring about intake procedures for aging family members not currently residing with immediate family. It was dated 3 weeks ago. It referred to me by name. They were not simply cutting me out of a reunion. They were laying groundwork. Quietly, patiently, the way you grade a road before you pour the concrete, they were preparing a case that Walter Reyes, widower, 66, freshly grieving and increasingly isolated, he might soon be better off cared for somewhere that wasn't in control of $48 million in company assets and a piece of downtown real estate that 3 different developers had been circling since the year. Margaret got sick. I sat in that study for a long time after I understood all of it. I did not cry. I did not shout. I thought about Margaret and what she would have said, and I knew exactly what she would have said, because she said some version of it to me every single day of our marriage. Walter, you built all this with your own 2 hands. Don't you ever let anybody tell you what it's worth or what you're worth. So here is what I did, and I am not ashamed to tell you every step, because I did not break a single law and I did not tell a single lie. I called Sam Okafor back and had her draw up an irrevocable trust, the Margaret Reyes Memorial Trust, and I moved 70% of Reyes Freight Lines ownership shares into it that same week, structured so that the trust's proceeds would fund full-ride trucking and logistics scholarships at West Texas A&M in Margaret's name, for kids from families like the one we grew up in, the kind of families who need somebody to believe they can build something too. I moved the deed on the house into the trust as well. I closed the joint family financial planning cloud folder and, with Sam's help, sent Bethany a formal, notarized letter revoking the informal financial power she believed she'd been quietly granted. Through years of helping me with online banking power, she had never actually been granted, at all, not legally, though I suspect Corbin had told her otherwise. Then I did the harder thing. I called Denise, my operations manager, and I told her I was unretiring. Not because I needed the money, because I needed, at 66 years old, freshly widowed and freshly betrayed, to remember what it felt like to build something instead of waiting to lose it. I did not cancel the Wild Horse Ranch Lodge reservation. I let it stand. 3 weeks later, on the Friday the reunion was set to begin, I drove out to Amarillo myself, not to the lodge. To the courthouse, where I filed the final paperwork transferring the trust, in the company of Sam Okafor and 2 witnesses, in the same building where Margaret and I had gotten our marriage license 42 years and 1 week earlier. Then, I drove to the lodge. I want to tell you what that room looked like when I walked in, because I have thought about it every day since. 40-some relatives, Margaret's whole scattered family, cousins from Lubbock and an aunt from as far as Tulsa, all gathered in the great room under the exposed beam ceiling I'd chosen myself, because Margaret loved the way the light came through them in the evening. And at the head of the room, looking very small and very confused, my daughter Bethany, and beside her, looking like a man who had just watched a truck he thought was empty pull away with the load still on it. Corbin. Dad? Bethany's voice cracked on the word. I thought Corbin said you weren't. I paid for the lodge, I said, quiet, the way I say everything now. I think I'm allowed to come to my own reunion. I did not make a scene. I did not need to. I simply walked to the front of that room, where Margaret's photograph sat on a small table surrounded by white roses, the way I'd arranged it weeks before any of this started, and I said what I'd come to say. I told that room about Margaret, about the Dairy Queen parking lot and the 2 trucks and 31 years of 6 a.m. departures. I told them I had built a scholarship in her name that would put West Texas kids through school for the next 100 years. And then, because it needed saying, and because I am done being quiet in the ways that matter, I told them, gently, without raising my voice, that I had recently learned some people in that room had been planning for a future in which I no longer had a say in anything I'd built a future. They'd started planning while I was still very much alive and very much capable, thank you, of reading a document. I did not point at Corbin. I did not have to. Every eye in that room found him anyway. Bethany's face went the color of the tablecloth. Dad, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know what he... I believe you, I told her, and I meant it. Because a father knows the difference between his daughter's confusion and his daughter's cruelty, even when someone else has been standing very close behind her, whispering. That's why I want you at that scholarship gala in the spring. Both our names on it. Yours and mine, and your mother's. Not his. Paul. Corbin left the lodge that night before dessert was served. I heard, through Denise, who heard it through half of Amarillo, that his consulting business folded within the year. Turns out a man who advises other families on wealth management doesn't do so well once word gets around about what he tried to manage out from under his own father-in-law. Bethany filed for divorce 4 months later. She calls me every Sunday now. Sometimes we don't even talk about anything important. Sometimes she just tells me about her week, and I tell her about the new drivers Denise hired, and that is enough. Because I have learned, the hard way, at 66 years old, sitting across from an empty chair, that the point was never punishment. I fly out to St. Bart's next spring, alone, the way Margaret and I always said we would once the business could finally run itself. I've kept her ring in my coat pocket every day since the funeral, and I'll keep it there on that beach too, because some promises don't end just because the person you made them to isn't standing beside you anymore. Here's what I want you to take from this, whoever you are, wherever you're listening from this morning. My mistake wasn't loving my daughter. It was mistaking a marriage for a shield, and forgetting that the people closest to us can be led just as easily as they can lead. If you've got something you built with your own hands, a business, a house, a family, a name, don't wait until somebody's already drafting the paperwork to decide what it's worth. Protect it while you're standing. That's not bitterness. That's just what Margaret would have called good sense. If this story reminded you of someone in your own life, a father, a mother, somebody who built something and deserves better than being quietly written out of it, say a prayer for them, or better yet, call them today. Thank you for sitting with me this morning. I'll see you next time.